My name is Annalee Davis, and this is White Creole Conversations, new ways of thinking about whiteness in a Caribbean context. Today I'm speaking with Adam Taylor, a young graphic designer in Barbados. Adam, thank you for joining me today. One of the things that I'm speaking about and interested in discussing with some of the participants is talking about tracing the ability that some white Caribbean or white Creole Caribbean people have the ability to trace family lines back quite a way. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about any ideas around inheritance, family legacy, and also how that connects to ideas around privilege.
You didn't necessarily inherit this immense wealth that supposedly your ancestors acquired, necessarily. But if we look at my own example from my own family, I had a man in my family who was a slave owner. He owned, quote unquote. He held 74 people in enslavement, and he got compensation from the British government when he had to free them. When he got that money, he was then able to really educate his kids. One of his kids went to the UK and became a doctor. He was given an annual allowance while he was a student, and when he came back, I assumed that he inherited more of what his dad had. He then, being given that opportunity, was able to educate his kids, and down the line.
Right.
And I may not have inherited the slave money, but somebody else's great-great-great-great-grandfather who was a slave wasn't able to give their kid the education, who then in turn wasn't able to give his kid the education, right. And then down the line.
Right.
I mean, people squander their privilege coming down the line, but we've still had something to work with. The majority of Black Barbadians have started in the last 200 years.
Right.
You know, they haven't been able to start moving up until that
right.
point.
Right.
And in that way, I think most of us have that privilege.
So you'd mentioned the word guilt before. Does that mean in some way, would you say that that's part of the white experience? There's in some way we're kind of imprisoned to colonial history, and you're saying it's not a useful thing. How do we move beyond that sense of guilt?
We can move beyond a sense of personal guilt, because we're only guilty for our own actions. We may feel a sense of shame for things that we didn't do, but our progenitors may have done.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, as an example, I may be the son of a rapist, but I'm glad to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my fault that he was a rapist, but I'm glad to be alive.
Right.
I could then find that the connection to that story and use it in a positive way to maybe help victims of rape. So white people who have a certain amount of privilege can, if they are so inclined, I don't believe that people should be forced to do anything, but if they're so inclined and they have that kind of quote-unquote soul,
mm-hmm.
that they can try to rectify some of the ways that white supremacy has destroyed a lot of places and
mm-hmm.
people and
mm-hmm.
societies.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, so if we think, I mean, one of the things I think about is creating a different kind of environment. So when you talk about rectifying the space, or have you ever thought about ways in which the space can feel different? Or what would you even envisage that a place like Barbados would feel like racially that would be better? And how do we rectify those? How do we rectify that? Like, what are some things that we can actually do? And I don't have any answers to that. It's just trying to figure out through all of these conversations ways in which we can consider, I don't know, thinking differently, behaving differently, acting differently.
We can recognize that sometimes people who are born into situations that they did not ask for do things for reasons that we can't understand, and so we can't say, look at these people doing these things. They should know better. They do things for reasons that we don't understand sometimes. We can't be so judgmental, and we're not in their shoes. We can't know why they make the decision that they make.
So to be sensitive.
Yeah, be sensitive. I think that that we are not very sensitive.
Really?
I think so. I think most of us are not very sensitive.
Us meaning white Barbadians.
White Barbadians.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of us, I think a lot of us don't go deep into self-identity. And when you start to look at your own self-identity, you try to see things from other people who are looking at their self-identity, and you kind of try to start understanding where they're coming from, because you have to unpack all this stuff. You realize that they're unpacking all that stuff too. But I think a lot of people don't take the time to empathize, and we don't see things the same way. We're not, do you know a lot of people that celebrate Emancipation Day, white people?
No.
So why not? Why don't we celebrate Emancipation Day? Isn't that something to celebrate?
Right.
What are we saying when we don't celebrate emancipation? Not only what are we saying, but what is being heard by other people who go, these people don't care anything about emancipation. Why not? Wasn't that a good thing, or do you guys still want to?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. That's something that we should all be celebrating. Yeah. So maybe that's an example of what can be done in one small way, participating in those national kinds of activities.
Yeah. Learning empathy. A lot of us are from the middle class, and a lot of other people are not. There's a large black middle class, but there's a large black lower class. There's not a large white lower class. And I think we're more segregated on class lines than racial lines. And those lines happen, well, not by accident, but we find ourselves segregated by class.
Right.
And we are mostly in the middle and upper middle class.
Right. Yeah.
So we can relate more easily with other middle class people of any ethnicity.
Right.
But it's more difficult for us to relate to people of a lower class than us, because we just haven't had the same experiences.
Right.
A lot of the time. Sometimes there overlaps.
Right. Okay. Would you say that you socialize along race or class lines, or you choose friends in terms of race? Is that like something that you do consciously or subconsciously? Like, do you even think about that when you're making friends or socializing?
I generally don't think about it when I'm socializing, and I generally don't socialize that much.
Okay.
So, but it happens to mostly be people from my class level, which is middle class.
And is it mostly whites that you engage with, or is it a diverse...
My closest friends are white. I have some friends that are not white, but I maybe have just a couple close friends.
So is there a difference in the social space and the professional space that you observe? So maybe professionally, because it seems like historically there's more, or not, I mean in recent history, that there's more diverse engagement happening in the workplace or in the school environment, and that doesn't necessarily trickle over into the social space or the personal environment. Would you say that's true?
It doesn't necessarily trickle over, but it can. A lot of your friends you make when you're young. Most close friendships are made when you're young, so whatever situation you were in when you were younger, you're probably going to be friends with those people for the majority of your life, as long as you're still in contact with them. So if you hang out with mostly white people when you're a kid, you're probably going to be friends with those people, and you may have some other friends, but your closest friends will end up being the people that you were closest to when you were growing up.
Right. Was race something that was discussed in your family growing up? Was that something that there was ever spoken about?
You get little comments here and there, but it wasn't really discussed. Just race consciousness, not really. Just acknowledging the difference between you and that other person, not being taught specifically you are X and they are Y. Just an acknowledgement in your use of words. You know, you say the black boy, the black man, the white man. So just you're not racially colorblind.
Right. But not conversations generally about race or race relations.
Probably not race relations. You always find people who are... Sometimes you find people who are from older generations who are not afraid to use terms that are distasteful now.
Right.
So my grandmother would tell me that my grandfather was... that her mother said, you know, what are you going out with that nigga man for? I mean, I look at him and I don't see any difference, but they obviously did. I mean, I know his genetic makeup now, so I know he was at least 10% black, but I couldn't see it by looking at him. He's just as white as I am, and, which is about the same as him. So, but yeah, and of course you go, oh, you know, you can't say things like that, but it is what it is.
So would you? I don't know if you have children. But do you feel that you would, if you had children, would you want to have conversations, or like there are young people in your family at all, like nieces or nephews would you imagine having conversations about race with younger people?
Yes, I think I would have conversations with younger people and my kids. I am aware that I may have hang-ups that they wouldn't have. So I wouldn't want to put my hang-ups onto them, but I would have to see what the situation is there and respond to situations as they come up. You know, if... I mean, when I was at school, I wore FUBU boots. And this guy told me, boy, you wear FUBU, you're a real black man, you know, that's cool. And I thought it was the best thing in the world. I grinned like an idiot. But those are not compliments. I know he meant it as a compliment, but I'm not a black man. And it's not cool to be something that you're not. So it also says, you know, white is not cool. And clearly, white is not cool. Pop culture, white is not really that cool. I don't like that. Because there are a lot of cool stuff. And there are a lot of good things in European culture that we can embrace, and it's not all you stole it from everybody and you raped and pillaged, and it's not all like that. We have to acknowledge the wrongs of history, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're looking for some kind of European identity to hold on to, you can't allow other people to push your identity onto you. You have to decide what your identity is, because other people are going to push the negative things onto you.
So I'm interested in the fact that you use the word Euro-Barbadian or European or Euro-Caribbean as opposed to white. Is there a reason for that? I mean, do you feel that in some way it's to distance? I don't know. Some people feel like they want to distance themselves from whiteness. In part, it's why I use the term white Creole.
I just find it more useful to use Euro-Caribbean because Europe is a place, the Caribbean is a place. I put those two together and I'm a mixture of those two places. White is something that changes depending on where you are, and it didn't always mean the same thing. So instead of constantly recreating what it means to be white, I think we can pretty much just say we know what it means to be European. That's changing with mass immigration, but we can generally say, okay, yeah, European roots. You kind of know what to expect when you hear European roots. Caribbean is different because a lot of our natives are gone. There's still a lot here, and there's some in me as well. So I wanted to put those things together,
Mm-hmm.
because we're kind of just a mishmash. So black, white, Indian, Chinese, native, etc. So I felt like that. I mean, it's not a novel term, obviously,
Right.
but I prefer using it because it means more to me than just white.
Right.
And that's telling, just white.
Right.
You know, it comes out.
Right. Yeah.
You're just white.
Right.
So maybe that's something also there.
Right.
Because we consume a lot of Western media, and Western media is like, the white is default.
Right. Right.
Which means that then it's not really special. It's not exotic. It's just white. It's default, majority, blah, America white.
Right.
And so they're Irish, or they're German.
Right.
Or they're Latin, or whatever, Hispanic, African American.
Okay.
We generally don't do, we do Afro-Caribbean, but that's mostly, I find, people who are doing the self-identity search as well. I don't think the average Barbadian would call themselves Afro-Caribbean.
No.
And so I kind of want to identify with the self-identity quest by using Euro-Caribbean instead of white.
Do you think about what binds us together? Is there anything that binds all Barbadians together, even the diversity? So there's a small Hindu population, a small Muslim, Jewish. Increasingly, there are more Chinese people coming in.
What binds us together? Europeans, Chinese, African descent, all that stuff. What binds us all together? I'm not sure, because there are elements of Barbadian culture that white people cannot take part in.
Like?
Well, would you go and put on a Mama Sally costume and dance?
You mean, would I perform in a tuck band as Mother Sally? No, I wouldn't.
Why? I think it's because that is something that's their thing.
Right.
That's not our thing. We have to figure out what part of the culture is our thing. Express ourselves through that. I think it would be bordering on disrespectful for a white person to do Shaggy Bear or Mama Sally.
Really?
Because I feel like that's their thing. I feel that way about Obia, about voodoo. I feel like that's their thing. And we don't really have the experience to make that an authentic expression of who we are.
Okay.
So I think those things are similar.
And where are the areas that we can comfortably participate then?
Just alcoholism, I guess we can get together on that. Tea time.
Right. Okay.
I don't know. I think most things we can, but I think there are elements that we, not that we couldn't, but that I feel like we shouldn't.
Right.
I don't think there's anything that exists that they can't take part in.
So,
but I mean, at the same time, I can point out those things that I feel are their things, but I can't point out anything that I feel belongs to us. Not looking for something to be exclusive,
right?
Not for the purpose of being exclusive or excluding anybody.
You just can't
but
think of it.
I can't think of something that I can go. I mean, okay, so the Irish indentured servant experience, but then that's theirs. That's not mine, because I didn't come out of that.
Right.
So,
what about something like polo? Because there seems to be more polo being played in Barbados, or more polo fields being made. Like, I don't know, there are 3 or something polo fields in Barbados. Like, I wonder if that's... I actually don't know if that's a very integrated space. I'm just throwing that out as like a...
player-wise, it probably is not integrated. Viewership is probably overrepresented whites in the crowd, but from pictures I can see that. I don't think I've ever been to a single match.
Right.
It's not. It doesn't really interest me. But can we say that that's part of our culture the same way that we can say
the Shaggy Bear is
part of our culture, or Flying Fish? Maybe in 20 or 30 years, if it becomes Bajanified.
Right.
You know.
Right. So can you talk about, is there anything in an activity that you do or a place or anything that really makes you feel Barbadian? Is there anything or anywhere that makes you feel really connected or that you belong,
Uh,
or an experience that you've had?
the accent and being able to understand the accent.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I speak, I naturally have a Barbadian accent, even though I was raised by a Trinidadian.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe my accent is not as
Broad.
broad, but I think that is quite Barbadian.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And are there experiences or things that you do or places that you go or?
well, white Barbados
Uh-huh.
is cattle wash.
Okay.
That's what I not everybody, but staying down cattle wash on some at summers growing
Right.
up. I feel like that's a white Barbados culture thing.
Right. So that's a place that Black Barbadians don't really enter.
Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
not really.
That's true.
Things like surfing is not white people either. It's not only white people either. Obviously,
right. That's an integrated sport.
I think that's mostly integrated. I'm not a surfer, but it seems like it's pretty integrated to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Rally.
That's a very integrated sport.
That's integrated.
Both from audience and participant.
Again, I'm not into a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
but okay, growing up, I would deride the rally as like a white thing because I was working that stuff out, and I would go, yeah, that's what white people do. White people put on their slippers and their Quicksilver baggies and their Oakleys, and they go down to the rally and they get some, they get some drinks.
Yeah.
And they make noise, and oh god, you see my seagull around the corner. I felt like that was a real white thing that I wanted to distance myself from because maybe I felt unpopular. Maybe I felt like it was a popular kid thing to do, and I didn't feel like a popular kid.
Right.
Boo-hoo,
Right.
But I saw it growing up as a white thing, but I know it's not really a white thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about the drivers. Maybe the drivers are unrepresentative of the country as well.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, because out of 100 people, there should be 2 people, 2 white people.
Right.
And what's funny is we can see the lack of that there, but we can also see when we're overrepresented. Let anything happen with animals or horses or anything like that, we're overrepresented. It's mostly white people there supporting the hope, or the ark.
Okay, that's funny. Okay, is there anything else that you think that you might want to mention?
If you want to, you're talking about like white Caribbean people being homogenous. I can talk more about my family history because it isn't really homogenous, and a lot of people think that you can tell who somebody is by looking at them, and you go, right, that's a white person, you live in a wall house, you inherited massive wealth from your slave-owning ancestors. Generally, we are middle class. Generally, I don't know a lot of people who inherited a plantation from the 1600s. Your grandparents bought a plantation, your parents bought a plantation.
My great-grandmother.
Right.
In 1920.
I don't know anybody then that has inherited that kind of wealth. It has trickled down in various ways. People think that they can tell who you are by just looking at you. But there's this thing, 23andMe, that does DNA testing, ancestry DNA testing. I got all 4 of my grandparents to do them. One grandfather was 99.5% white, European. Not a big surprise. 0.3% African, which in Barbados is a little bit of a surprise, actually, because most of us have some kind of mix.
For sure. You mean it's surprising it's so little?
It's surprising it's so little.
Right.
It was surprising it was so little. It wasn't surprising that he was mostly European. It was surprising that he didn't have more of a mix. My my grandmother was mostly European and almost 30% South Asian, Indian, because my great 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 grandfather came from Karnataka in India as an indentured servant to Trinidad. And you wouldn't be able to tell that by looking. My my other grandfather was 10% African. I haven't pinpointed where that is yet. I think it's from Suriname. His grandfather was Scottish. He came over from Scotland in 1874. They came they came from shepherds and fishermen. So those were not colonialists. Those were hardworking country people who probably paid high taxes to the lord of the land.
Mm-hmm.
Once he got to Trinidad, he became successful. He married into a very successful family. Her family, I could trace back to the 15th century in France. They owned a lot of estates in Trinidad. They are definitely part of the white elite of Trinidad. Mm-hmm. French Creole elite, for sure. I didn't inherit any of it, unfortunately. My grandfather didn't inherit any of it either, apparently.
So there's a lot of diversity in there, is what you're saying.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
I have back in Barbados, even in that 0.3%, I traced back to a lady named Fanny Ann, who was from St. Joseph, who was apprentice laborer in 1836, which means that prior to 1834, she was a slave. I have an internal battle between all of these different warring nations. I have the colonized, the colonizers, slaves, slave owners. So it's a very personal thing for me to work out who I am and where I belong. Mm-hmm. I go with Creole Caribbean again because I think it's I'm French, German, Irish, English, Scottish. I'm Indian. Right. I'm Native Caribbean. My great great grandmother was a Native Caribbean woman from Arima in Trinidad. She married an Italian man in Trinidad and had a wash of kids. I have a picture of her. She looks like a Native Caribbean person. They were made fun of because they were the tainted French Creoles. She was a Native Caribbean person,
right,
who married a wealthy Italian,
right,
in Trinidad. Their children then were not the same as the other,
right,
their cousins then,
right,
and they were made fun of,
right.
And I spoke to some family members that remember it being difficult, especially in Trinidad, because Trinidad is a little different in here with the French Creole thing.
And you find that confluence difficult.
I kind of like it.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. I identify most with the European because it is what I am mostly.
Right.
But I'm very, very interested in the others as well. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's more authentic if you express yourself in a way that is reflective of your ancestry. For some reason, maybe it's a silly idea, but I feel very close to the Scottish ancestry, probably because I just have a personal connection to him, and I have his journals, and I have, all kinds of stuff.
Good. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. Sorry for taking
a detour.
Great.
Thank you so much.
No problem.